Says this meeting is being live streamed. Cameras up, you would look at cameras.
Oh, we don't need cameras.
There
There
you go, yeah.
Yep. There we are.
Oh, there we are.
There we are.
Live streaming. Yeah. All right, we're gonna go ahead and call to order the City of Sherwood Planning Commission meeting for March 28th, 2023 for work session only. You wanna do a roll call or introduce yourself?
Oh, yeah. Yes, a few introductions.
Let's do introductions. We'll start at this end and go around.
Yeah, I'm Eric Rutledge, Community Development Director with the city. Welcome to our two commissioners. Very happy to have you. Just say, I'll take a moment. It's gonna be steep learning curve probably. I think one of you has, I'm not sure which one has some background in development planning, but either way, it might be a little bit of a steep learning curve, but we're really happy to have you. Thank you for joining us. And if you have any questions, let us know. That's what we're here. So.
Thanks.
And I'm Bruce Coleman, I'm Economic Development Manager for the city, and I'm responsible for encouraging the growth of a more broad-based economy.
Gene Simpson, we met, Chair of Planning Commission. Just a little bit, Eric was a planner and now he's, I think. Community development is just above planning, right? It encompasses planning, building,
Planning building.
right?
Yeah.
So he used to be in the fray with us at meetings and now he.
I'm still in the fray with you. I'm here for you guys.
Come down here and slaughter with us.
Yes, it's slumming with us.
Yeah.
So, but Eric's our fearless leader in planning.
Yeah, I'm Erica Palmer, Planning Manager.
Okay, yeah, Dan Vance, planning commissioner, and since 2020.
Colleen Rich, planning technician.
Great, Tyler Barnes, planning commissioner.
Cora Capta.
And welcome the new commissioners. We'll have a formal introduction at our first hearing if I get it right on the agenda, so. Then you'll be introduced in the public process. And then I was hoping this evening before we leave, we could do just a quick what to expect at the next meeting, because we'll have public hearings. This is an informal process, so it's a work session. Everybody can ask and answer questions as the topics come up. And then when we get to the formal hearing process, we have two hearings next meeting. So I'll just give you a little rundown before we leave tonight. If you have any questions about what to expect, so. All right.
All right.
On to economic opportunities.
Yes. So this evening, we're going to talk about a updated refinement to our economic opportunities analysis. And I have some extra hard copies here. If you would.
Introduce yourself.
Let's introduce ourselves.
Do it again.
just put Commissioner Kai on the spot.
Sorry, Justin Guy. Formerly vice chair.
A vice chair now.
Yes, vice chair.
Planning commissioner par excellence.
Yeah.
Par excellence, I like that.
And then this is Tyler Booth and Barnes, he's new commissioner number 1. And Corey Capto, new commissioner number 2.
Nice to meet you.
We haven't given any secrets out yet, so no one knows anything about either of the new commissioners. So- They haven't missed any secrets yet, so we're good. Erica was just about to start our economic opportunities.
Yep. So I have some hard copies here if anybody needs a hard copy. Okay, looks like we're all good. I'm going to share my screen here. Hold on 1 second. Oh yeah, I made that just for you. Thank you.
Do you have a background 101 on how this whole thing is our community?
Yes, I do
Is
here.
that part of your power?
Yep,
Okay.
that is. I just need to. There we are. The magic. The magic of screen sharing on Zoom. It just takes me a minute with live streaming. And getting everything ready. Oh,
That was technology.
I know. So yes, tonight we're going to be talking about a little refinement to our economic opportunities analysis. Our last economic opportunities analysis was adopted in 2021, and it was adopted as part of the city's comprehensive plan update. Tonight, I'm going to talk a little bit about the state requirements for an EOA. I'm going to talk about what has changed from our last EOA. And the three major things that have changed from the last EOA, I'm just going to give them away here really quick, is our employment growth forecast, and then our forecast for our land forecast for needed employment, and then also our buildable lands inventory has been updated. So next, at our next meeting on April 25th, we'll have a hearing on this subject, and the Planning Commission will make a recommendation to council to whether or not to approve this document or approve it with modifications or just to deny it. So what is goal 9? So I've already talked a little bit about our state land use system with our 2 new planning commissioners and how we have 19 statewide planning goals, and how our comprehensive plans for cities and counties need to address all applicable planning goals that relate to, their cities and counties. We have 12 statewide planning goals that are applicable to Sherwood, and goal 9 in the statewide planning goals section is talks about economic development. And what we really need to do is cities and counties, we need to provide adequate opportunities throughout the state for a variety of employment jobs to, create, vital communities for the health, welfare, and prosperity of our citizens. People need jobs. People need to work. At least we hope they do. At least. So what exactly is an EOA? So it's comprised of several different topic areas. One of the first topics is that we look at economic trends, nationally, regionally, even at the local level. And then we do a jobs forecast, and that jobs forecast is how many jobs will Sherwood likely create over the next 20 years. And then we talk about what kind of industries we want to target, because different employers, they have different land needs. So so for example, if you want a large semiconductor industry to, move into Sherwood and start that kind of business here, they might need, a 100-acre parcel for their development, unlike, a McDonald's that may need like half an acre for their development site. And then we do an inventory of land for employment. So we take it's really what is our supply of land here in Sherwood. So we look at the map and we categorize all of our parcels, what's already developed, what's vacant, what parcels have constraints, because we have to take out those constraints that can't be developed on, such as, wetlands, slopes over a certain percentage, our floodplain areas. So we have to take all that land out of the inventory because that can't be built on. And then we get to a number of, how many acres are buildable for employment here in Sherwood. And then based on all of that information, we reconcile our job growth with how much land supply we have in Sherwood. And we might have an oversupply or we might have a deficit of land for job needs. And we're going to go over all that information here in just a second. And then we may or may not want to, formulate new goals and policies, but we just adopted our comp plan, within the past 2 years. And even with this refinement, there isn't really any need to develop any more, new policies per se, but we can have that conversation if you feel like there's some information that's come out of this refinement that we might need to create a new policy for. We can talk about that and the process of changing that in the future. So as I said, what's being refined in this EOA? So we took a look at the economic trends and how those have been shaping up since the last EOA update. We listed and we listed the target industries, but we haven't necessarily changed them from the last EOA. We are still, we're going to talk about those target industries here in a minute, but those really haven't changed since the last EOA. But we took a look at our employment land needs and our projected demand for land in the future and our growth rate, which has changed. And then our BLI, our buildable lands inventory, that has changed. And then, like I said, we do that reconciliation between our buildable lands inventory, how much land we have that can be developed, and then our future growth projected rate for employment, and see if we have a deficit of land or maybe an oversupply. So the economic trends in this report, the report touches on gross domestic product. And I'm not going to get into all the details because I'm sure that you've read the report. Gross domestic product is just one way to measure, national trends. And also in the report, it touches on, we've seen a growth of, online shopping, definitely with the rise of, Amazon. And we've seen increased automation happening. And once again, I just want to go back to Amazon with online shopping and automation, because you have that software app on your phone. You click it, you click that product that you want. There may be in their warehouse some robot that goes down the aisle, picks up your toilet paper. Everybody needs toilet paper. Drops it in a box, and then there, maybe somebody, over at the end of that process to make sure it's on the conveyor belt and mailed out. So that's just, one whole process that shows, online shopping, automation, and it's kind of been decreasing, jobs with automation. But regionally, this area, the metro area, we have outperformed the nation, as well as the state of Oregon over the last decade in certain job categories. So our strengths here in the metro area have been in construction, professional business services, manufacturing, warehousing, and transportation. And I just want to say that all of these uses, construction, manufacturing, warehousing, and transportation are all major drivers of industrial land demand. So we're seeing that here in the metro area. In Washington County, we've seen robust employment here in Washington County, and that remains consistent with the metro area as we're part of the metro area. And then Sherwood, locally, we have outperformed Washington County in terms of growth over the last decade. So the employment base in Sherwood grew at an average growth rate of 3.8% from 2010 to 2019. That was prior to the pandemic. But we're still kind of seeing that growth rate still occur with the new businesses and the new developments that we're seeing in Sherwood, especially in the Tonkin employment area. So we've seen growth in trades, constructions, and food service and healthcare. Those are kind of the major sectors that we're seeing growth in here in Sherwood. But wages in Sherwood are lower than the county. We do have a younger workforce, and that's because a lot of the jobs here in Sherwood are, kind of those service industry based jobs. We have a lot of like retailers here in Sherwood.
So can I ask a question
Yeah.
clarifying this?
Clarify.
So wages in Sherwood are lower than the county. I think what you're trying to say that the jobs that are available in Sherwood are lower than the rest of the county because the workforce in Sherwood, the wages that people realize that work here are higher because we either are working remotely or leaving to go. So I think the slide is confusing when you do the presentation that the wages in Sherwood is specifically related to the jobs that are based in Sherwood, not the employees that are in Sherwood. So I think it's,
Yes.
so I think
I can clarify that.
for presentation.
For presentation.
Because I've never heard in presentation before that the citizens of Sherwood's.
No, so the median household incomes in
Yes.
Sherwood are higher than the county and at the regional level.
Right,
Yeah.
right, so yeah,
Yep.
for clarification, I think
Yep.
that would help, and so.
Definitely make that change.
The employment base that's growing in Sherwood is only based on land base, does it take into account any remote workers or any that, it's hard to capture that, I just.
Probably not unless they're actually operating their own business out of their home. But if they're working for Nike, but now everyone's doing remote, that job is gonna be shown in Beaverton
Right,
still, so.
yeah, it's hard to capture, it's like
Mhm.
this. We don't have a census data point or a polling census or anything that helps. And it would be interesting.
It would be interesting. I
So
agree.
I don't know if the next time we do some sort of economic polling or housing needs polling, just put a little sticky note thing that is how many remote workers we have, because it would help. We always talk about how many people leave, and I would be curious, because those are based on numbers that were all pre-pandemic. We've got stale dated information from what I think we've been using.
Yeah, we don't have Jerry Johnson here. Jerry Johnson is our, project manager on the private consulting side for this EOA. He can answer all these questions like in a lot of detail. So I'd say if you have remaining questions during the public hearing, ask them and he'll be able to answer all of them. Right?
Yeah.
Really, all of this, there've been a lot of changes with the pandemic in terms of the economy, and including, how we approach this analysis. So
Yeah.
I think Jerry said 5 years or so is what it's gonna take for the data, for the changes to really come up through the data. It's still gonna be a little while before we really start to see it.
And maybe add that to the slide so that when we do the presentation, that the audience understands that, because I understand it, and I don't want to stand my questions just for the public hearing, but if we can put it in the
I think
presentation.
the other aspect of that, I'm really interested in seeing remote workers who are living here and working here, because some of them could be on reports too at some point, and there could be ways of growing startup tech companies, at an early stage that could come from remote workers that maybe don't forever want to work for Intel or whatever, you don't know.
Mhm. Okay, thank you.
Just to play devil's advocate and kind of ask the question that this is making me think about.
Mhm.
With all the changes of, and again, I know a lot of companies are there either hybrid, some are remote, but a lot, for one reason or another, want to try to get back to a location centric workplace or workforce. If there's a significant amount of our residents who are remote work, does does the effort to bring higher wage jobs into Sherwood, it still matters in a post-pandemic world, right? Because there's still tax benefits to it and other things like that, right?
Yes.
Okay.
Yep.
Okay. I was just wondering.
It's mainly, it's certainly because you don't know how long companies are gonna allow remote,
Yeah.
right? And so there's two benefits. One is that you're starting to then capture the opportunity for people who are working on American trust. Doesn't mean they're going to, but without opening up land, you can't create that opportunity, number one. And number two, the city is, I wouldn't care about it, but it has a fiscal balance or a fiscal base that is very residential based. So the property taxes for services are funded primarily by one source, which is the homeowner. That's instead of property tax. Say it's, you want a diverse tax base, they just put that.
Right, because that still will benefit the city.
Oh, we have it.
As it,
Yeah.
Okay, all right.
And that's a great segue between both your comments here for the next.
Like we read ahead to the Packer Party, yeah.
So more residents actually commute out of Sherwood for work. And, you know, the city has recognized this fact. And, you know, even in the report that you have in front of you, it talks about Sherwood, you know, as being a bedroom community. And what the council, one of council's main goals is economic development. And how can we have a better, you know, jobs to housing balance in Sherwood, because we know that, you know, I don't want to say industrial, but, you know, having a better employment land base ratio, yeah, is going to balance out the tax base here in Sherwood. So as, you know, city services increase in costs for, you know, police, library, and all the services that we love here in Sherwood, as those costs increase, that those employment-based companies or those employers can help balance the tax rate. So it's not all on single family residences.
So one of the comments that I heard recently at an open house that we had was, why are we, specifically in Sherwood West, why are you putting jobs, or why are you building so much commercial out here? Sherwood is a bedroom community and should stay a bedroom community. And we should put mostly houses out there so that we keep this bedroom community feel. So when we are presenting this to the public and it gets to council for hearing, I would like a slide or a point that explains how much it costs per residential unit compared to a commercial or an industrial unit, so that someone who's looking at us making these decisions, especially when we go into the Sherwood West side of it, that we are making this conscious decision to divide our land so that we are fiscally responsible and we don't have to continue to bond or burden our community. And I just want to make sure, I realize that maybe it's buried in the details here, but when we're doing the presentation here and in council, if that slide can be presented, like, here's what a house costs, what it conduct, you know, per acre or something. I know there's numbers like that, and it doesn't have to be perfect.
Cost for services.
Yeah, because I heard one time that it's like
$1.32.
$1.32 for for every residence, but when you go into the commercial and the industrial side, it's all less than $1 per.
Cities generate more revenue and pay for less services when you do a manufacturing company, you know, police, you know, resurface the local streets, you know, that kind of thing.
Plus it's a core.
And so it's you know, that's just a fact.
It is a factor, and I want the citizens who are gonna be hearing this either on our live stream this evening or when it comes to the council hearing to understand, and as we go through the Sherwood West process, why we're focusing heavily on changing our job base.
Yeah.
So it sounds like it should probably be something of like financially where we are now compared to where we'd like to be. And I think a way to think about that would be or highlighting that what do you call it? The deficit of what it costs to service a residential home in Sherwood compared to what that home provides in fiscal revenue. And if we could show, say, how much commercial or industrial development would help offset to get that ratio equal, I think that is probably a good,
That'll be a good number. when we look
yeah.
at
But a little challenging. It's a little challenging to do this on the local level.
We've had these conversations.
We've seen a study that another bedroom community did.
Yeah.
Their finance director did in North Plains, a little different from Sherwood, becoming pretty much a residential community. North Plains' recent study basically indicates that in order to remain with a quality of life that the residents expect, police service, libraries, and that kind of thing, they're going to have to generate something like 500 to 700 acres of new industrial land. And that, of course, may be challenging because much of that land, I think, is in the urban reserve and maybe part of the grand bargain. I'm not sure. That was done by the legislature, put it into rural reserve. I'm not sure about that. Erica might know that, better than I did.
I don't know.
Certain, but that doesn't make a difference. The point is, their fiscal study is the one we've seen. And each one has to be very tailored. You really need an economist to do that kind of analysis. Because some cities have fire services. We don't, as a city, some cities have other services. It really requires an economic study to be done of the municipal service level. I think we can certainly talk about what we believe is the case. We do know, and I think the comprehensive plan may have a statement someplace in it to the effect that, particularly on the property tax state, you gotta be mindful that there's no sales tax, there's only property tax, pretty much to service cities, to provide for city services. And when that's on the homeowner, almost entirely, that is, I don't know how to put this, I don't want to say perilous, but in the long term, it's probably not sustainable. I think there's some phrasing in one of the comp plan documents, I don't remember anymore. But how do you put that into actual numbers?
Yeah.
We've talked about that a lot with the finance department here, with the city manager. We really have to bring in.
Why do we need to put it in numbers? We use it as a graphic.
And that's right.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm just trying to think of, as Gene's talking about it, just a way to visually demonstrate the need for more industrial, commercial to offset our.
So you have a group of houses that fill a bucket half full.
Yeah.
And, or has a hole in the bottom, and you have a group of houses plus industrial plus commercial that fills the bucket.
Yeah, or even, fills it more. Yeah. If it's a demonstration of.
Yeah.
This is what it costs, or this is what, this type of businesses need in terms of services. But in terms of what they provide in revenue, they provide more revenue than. But I don't know if that might be.
Yeah, I think.
Less is more, right? Look at photos.
Exactly.
Yeah, I think you did, stack bar charts where you could say, houses, industrial, commercial use this many services, and when you put the colors in on who does.
So that being said, but I do agree with the idea that the council or we or somebody needs to make a pitch to the community to reassert this, why it's best. Yeah, because I sympathize with that comment. I mean, I don't think everybody thinks that suddenly we should add a bunch. Part of the reason I live in Sherwood is because my job is not here, right? I mean, I think there are people like that, right? Want to, this is, to me, and we're adding, trails, it's almost like the suburb Portland area in some ways, I don't want a bunch of industry. But if there is an offsetting component, and by the way, so far, residents have been willing to pay it too. Look at our demand here. People want to live here.
Right.
No matter what the cost is, they move here anyway. So we have to overcome that. And so we have to convince them, look, in the long run, like you're saying, if that is true in the long run, then we need some industrial, we need something else to help supplement the city so it isn't overwhelming to the residents. But I think that pitch is an important one to make, just because there are folks I can sympathize with that comment.
Yeah, there are people that are wanting affordable housing and it's twofold. One is the bedroom community, you have that extra cost, but in this community, the size of apartments, they've done a study. Our apartments are the same cost per foot as the rest of Washington County. It's just that the size of the apartments are, 10 to 20% larger. So when you look at a 2-bedroom apartment, cost per foot is the same, but it's 20% larger. And so it ends up being monthly more. So that's one of our housing needs analysis answer. So, but anyway, that's down the rabbit trail. But thank you. Yeah, I think it's good to put it out when it gets to council, when people are watching their hearing and understanding why.
Nope, that's a great comment. So the commuting pattern here. So this is Sherwood's commuting pattern for employment based on the US Census data. And so there's, 824 people that live and work here in Sherwood. A little over 9,000 folks from Sherwood commute out to Sherwood. And, they're commuting to, Portland, Hillsborough, Tigard, Beaverton and Wilsonville, our surrounding communities. And then we have a little over, a little over 5,600 people that are commuting into Sherwood to work. You know what? I think it does in our packet here. It has a date, but
Yes.
it wasn't caught on this slide.
I think it's very clear. It's on one more page.
Okay.
Yeah, because everything changed.
Maybe I'm misreading this slide, but if you zoom in, Southwest Mirror Court is what looks like Sunset Ave.
No, that's just a mapping issue.
Oh, I think that's just the mapping issue on the,
That's not, that doesn't mean that's where people are working. Is that what you mean?
No,
it's just- Yeah, it's just,
Coming out.
Yeah. Yeah.
yeah, and unfortunately, I can't fix that, 'cause that came directly from the census map, the census spits out this map when I put in what I want to see.
Here it is on there, it's just behind the black, it's 2019.
Yeah. All right, so our target industries they haven't changed since our last economic opportunities analysis. We are still really focused on advanced manufacturing and machining and clean tech, professional business services, and then service for residents as well, such as, legal services, retail, and personal services. Bruce, do you want to talk about our aspirations for our target industries?
I mean, I think it's really clear from council's repeated direction and the goal setting sessions that they're very interested in semiconductors. And we were just talking a little bit before that the thought was that all that went into Walton, but the reality is anything west of 124 on the south side is actually Sherwood. If you can picture, on 12 Sherwood Road, you can picture that the side of Walton is so displaced. And Lam Research, for example, is what the economist says they're one of the 4 top semiconductor companies in the world. So they came in with 45,000 square feet on the north side, which is shown the picture where they originally went. That was manufactured on Trader Jobs at the time they came in late 2021. Then they just leased very recently another 280,000 on the south side, which is in the city of Sherwood. So they're over 200,000 square feet. I don't think anybody guessed that 2.5 to 3 years ago, 2.5 years ago, we had one of the 4 largest semiconductor companies in the world here. I mean, it just wasn't expected for some reason. So semiconductors is very important. Companies that do research and development are very important. That can be part of what somebody does in semiconductors, of course. Advanced manufacturing can include all kinds of companies. It can be sometimes it's called climate tech, sometimes it's called clean tech, it's electrification, e-vehicles, those kinds of things. So research on that. There's some really neat companies in the surrounding area both in Tualatin, about 2 blocks away from our city limits, and in Wilsonville that are doing some very interesting work on large scale battery development, which is going to be the future. So these are companies of the future. We've got already companies that are in the aerospace field here. We've got companies that are in the space field. At least one company that I know that does work for SpaceX. We've got we don't have unmanned, as they call it, unmanned vehicles, but that should be something of great interest to us as a future industry. Biosciences, life sciences should be a really good opportunity for us. None of this is easy, but because the reach is not known by biosciences, the only reason the large company Twist came into Wilsonville. Robotics makes a lot of sense. We do have an automation company that moved here, DW Fritz, took a large space in Sherwood. They're a Swedish-owned company. We've got a clean tech semiconductor company such as NSI that just came in here. They're a German-based company. Software. We hear the term outdoor wear a lot. That's a really big industry in Metro Portland. It's about 126 or 30 companies. We know the big ones. They're Columbia and those kinds of things. There's lots of small companies. And sometimes that's called sports tech. So people like Intel are really also in sports tech. So, and then metal machinery, that's a very big industry, because you can't have aerospace without that. And we've got some pretty neat companies doing precision machining in Sherwood that are now expanded, like Tresky, for example. That's a really interesting company. They're either doing it in space. So it looks like kind of this we're not really, our goal is not distribution. We're going to get distribution as part of the industrial economy. But we don't go out seeking it. It's gonna come. But we are fortunate to be some ways 4 miles from the freeway, so it's gonna be less. We find there's less interest in that. Usually when buildings are built here, they seem to go to manufacturing companies that are otherwise probably leaving Greater Portland. They're coming from the city of Portland, from some of the inner suburbs of Portland. They're expanding in Sherwood. And if they can't expand in the metro, they'll go someplace else. Because there's just not enough land in the metro area for manufacturing companies. So that's kind of the story. I don't know if that's what you're thinking.
Yep.
Yeah.
Perfect. Okay, so the next couple of slides here are going to talk about our employment forecast and then our land demand forecast. And there's a lot of modeling work that goes into this information. And I just want to say that we had a technical advisory committee for this process, and we had Commissioner Bantz sat on our technical advisory committee for the Planning Commission. I think the mayor, or maybe it was Doug Scott, I can't remember. We had a counselor on that technical advisory committee. We had industrial brokers. We had industrial developers. We had NAOP. We actually had the Gold 9 specialist from the state of Oregon. She sat on that committee as well. So we Washington County. So we had a lot of different folks sitting on this technical advisory committee, providing us, comments and additional details about the market here in Sherwood, which really kind of helped formulate our employment forecast. So we looked at 3 different scenarios for our employment forecast. And the first forecast here is what we call the safe harbor forecast. And the state of Oregon, when we do these EOAs, like I said, they're pretty technical in nature. They have some Oregon administrative rules that says when you do an employment forecast, you can do it this way, or that way, but you need to back it up with data. So the safe harbor approach actually looked at Oregon's employment department's number for average growth in the metro region, and they're saying that the average growth is 2%. So over a 20-year period, the forecasted growth would be a little over 4,000 jobs. Then we took a look at, okay, what has been that the average annual growth in Sherwood over the past, 10 years. So we took a look at that information and like I said earlier, we have seen significant growth over the past 10 years for employment. And it's been 3.4% average annual growth for employment. And so if we extend that and look out over the 20-year period, that's going to provide a little over 9,000 jobs in our forecasted period. But then we talked to our TAC, and about the employment forecasting and our methods. And we made an adjusted employment forecast from our Sherwood trend forecast. And so we kind of all settled on the 3.2 average annual growth rate with a little over, 8,000 jobs for the planning period. I don't know, Commissioner Vance, do you want to give any input?
I've got comments.
Yeah.
I don't know if you want to complete your presentation and circle back, or now it's good.
I want you to provide comments.
Comments along the way.
Comments along the way.
Okay, yeah, I was there for all the meetings, and saw this process go through. So, in my work, I'm involved in forecasting, estimation and risk and that kind of stuff. So, and banks these days are really heavily regulated in terms of, model development, model rigor and validation requirements, all that stuff. So, I have become accustomed, I think, to a bit more, documentation and evidence and stuff in there than I'm thinking that I saw, at least in some of this process. There were some, let me start with the goods on this report. The goods in this report, I think that the current supply review, the inventory of what we currently have, I think that was a great discussion. I know there were some weaknesses with their model, identified land and whatever, but there were folks on the call who just knew these properties super well and able to kind of clarify exactly how much is there and all that. And I also think, and we can talk about this, but the overall conclusion of the report passes some reasonableness tests, just from a conceptual standpoint, in terms of, okay, I think we have a shortage. The methodology, though, is a little interesting. So, for example, the report just says you start with unemployment rate forecast, and then it goes from there. Okay, so in my world, stop. Now, wait a minute. Why unemployment? Why employment levels? Why is that the one variable we are using in this model? Where did that come from? What alternative variables were discussed? None. There was never a meeting where the consultant sat down with us and said, okay, we need to forecast demand. Let's go around the room and ask, what do you think are some drivers of this? And then we will investigate building a model that accommodates and tests those drivers. Never happened. It was, I keep saying unemployment because that's a common one we use in our world. Employment is it. And there is very little, and I'm not saying that's a bad variable. I think it does, there's a lot of, it makes sense in a lot of ways. I'm just saying it's not well documented as to why this particular variable was selected, what its strength was, its explanatory power, what alternative models were investigated, what are the assumptions and limitations. For example, if you're going to build a model off of employment that you've observed in the past several years, and our model is designed to estimate demand of land, well, land is partly constrained as well by the planning process over the last several years. So how much is the employment growth that we've seen over the last several years itself affected by the land that we have supplied? So maybe it's a biased variable to some degree already, right? So is that really the only variable we should be using? Maybe we should consider other things when we factor in what is the true demand out there for industrial land. I don't know that this is the only variable, but it seems pretty good. So I think so one of the things I suggested, and I didn't see it in the report too much, was let's document this decision more, describe it, show us some of the tests. There's not even a lot of, I mean, I know they don't put a lot of math in these things, and that might be kind of black box behind the scenes. One of the things I thought probably drove that is, like you mentioned, the safe harbor forecast. Safe harbor, it even says on page 21, this is the state's approved version. So if you go with forecasting just by using this one variable, and you do it our way, which is a total black box, you're protected from all challenges. So it's just the safe harbor mystery theater, how to do this, is what it is. Thankfully, I think our team kind of went a different direction. We did take, I think, the scenario 3 and did some overlays. There was a lot of good discussion on that. One thing that also is missing even in the final analysis is, okay, so even if we went with the shorter trend forecast before and kind of backed it off, what was the process of quantifying those overlays exactly? So all that to say is I'm not here saying, oh, it was the wrong variable selected, the wrong, stuff. I wouldn't go that far. I do think there is conceptual soundness to that design to a degree. I just don't think it's well tested, at least not in a way that we can all challenge it. There's a lack of effective challenge, as we call it in the industry, on that to some degree. So that's a limiting factor. But it's up to us to kind of look at the final analysis report with our reasonableness judgment and, okay, do we think this is valuable? So if we're going to land on this, like, yes, that many acres is it, question that, or you say, well, it's probably indicative of a range that might be more reasonable. The other part that I can't speak to as much, I thought was just interesting, is when they forecasted the employment, one of the things they did to come up with to come up with the final analysis, they turned that employment into number of jobs per square foot. And that was interesting. That's not an area that I'm an expert in. And so it was intriguing to hear everybody kind of discuss that and work through. I think there was largely a judgmental component of that as well in there, but that's not my area. That's an unsure one for me, more than kind of tackling that. So I did think the recommendations we'll get to, there was a lot of continue to monitor, work with, typical kind of stuff, but but overall, I think it's probably headed in the right direction, some good action. So, and then also, this was a slow process. Oh man, I mean, look at the economic data. It says it's Q2 last year, and that's how long this is gone. In my field, we'd be already using 1231, and at least we're almost up to a year since the last cutoff in economic data now. And look what's been happening in the economy kind of since then already. The uncertainty is, if nothing else, has probably increased. And I realize that's just a factor of government processes and these big groups and so forth. But I feel there's room for we can do this a little bit faster. Particularly that last month was okay, we just got a few the recommendations or something in there. It took too long. It might be. So anyway, those are my overall framed out comments on this report. So that's saying on here, as she's walking through these, just know those are what I view as some of the limitations possibly of the approach in there.
So, having gone through this a couple times with both the economic analysis and housing needs analysis, I underlined we are doing job force based on a safe harbor, not what we. It's not a projection. It's not a projection of our expectations. Budgeted forecast, so we could say this is the land supply we need to make our job space be balanced. So I think that in my opinion, taking exercise has become a fatal flaw in a self-fulfilling prophecy. If we continue to think that we're going to grow jobs at 3.8% and our housing at 3.6% or whatever, we are not putting ourselves in a position to put Sherwood West and flip it into anything other than the continuation of what we have right now, which is what we do want, but we have, I don't see a tool in the Oregon modeling that enables us to say, we are 30% projecting a % increase in the jobs because we are going to focus a large percentage. So I agree with that. But this has been a challenge, and I don't know if there was a way in your process that we would be able to flip the model or project it differently.
But I want to say, remember with our goals and policies and our action items. I think that's how we get there in the long run.
The reality is the Oregon model, the Oregon model is not an aspirational model. It's a model of that certainly, that you want to protect farms, fields and farms, but at the same time, you need to create an economy so that the farms, but at the same time, the Oregon model isn't aspirational as to what a city might want to do in order to produce the revenue that it would need, produce the jobs that it needs. This is a very, very unique thing in other states I've worked in. And Oregon's unique, it has its special benefits, but there's concerns certainly in the market that we're not going to be competitive for CHIPS Act monies. The legislature is getting very concerned about that because Intel is building 1,000 acres in Ohio because the state wants it. We don't necessarily want 1,000 acres, I don't know. But because I turned down a 500 acre semiconductor facility for Sherwood and for the area because we don't have 500 acres. We don't have frequently turned down land base is not there, and so they go to those states. So they generally Oregon doesn't have the land. And so that's a broader picture, but the EOA does reflect it. We look at what happens in the past. They give you within a range of what you can grow. And so the council, I think, wanted us to try to do something more aspirational with this, which is really what we tried with the last really. What we tried to one of the last was not exactly. But it said we needed something like 8 acres of industrial land over the next 20 years. Ridiculous. It doesn't reflect the reality of demand. The demand is hard to project. We did have a broker of the EOA at the TAC meetings, who probably can't talk about the actual land, except to say that there is just a lack of land in the metropolitan area of this region to be competitive with, whether it's Salt Lake City or Denver, whatever our peers. So I think that's the challenge we have. So I think that's the challenge we have. We've got a mechanism. Yes, you can use the safe harbor. Yes, you can use challenge anything. But our sense is there's a desire to try to be more aspirational than that safe harbor.
Right, but I think the other side of that is that this EOA doesn't have checks and
There
balances.
is no one that's gonna come back and say you failed your EOA because you.
There is no one that's gonna come back and say you failed, you built something
I mean,
that's different as long as
You have a test that
I mean,
says.
you have a test that says your
your
financial statement said you were gonna do this, and then you look poorly and say your financial statements, let's revisit our relationship.
Yeah.
I don't think this relationship with the state of Oregon, if we put in more.
No, but we want to go back and we want to monitor. But we want to go back. That's one.
Check.
That check.
I
That is
understand.
another
that-
component is back testing, has your model been predicted,
Right,
was it accurate, was it correct, was it accurate,
exactly.
was it correct when we estimated last?
I mean, the other thing is what I think Johnson Economics said someplace here, you're gonna get to the numbers. Probably not, I'm sorry, but the reality is that the acreage per land doesn't project anything that the Oregon Semiconductor Competitive Standards Board says is needed. And they say you need now, 500 acre sites, 500 acre areas in the metro area. Hillsborough doesn't have. That's why we said, sorry, you're gonna have to pass the semiconductor. We need X number of 50 acre sites. I can't remember the numbers. 50, we need smaller sites, but not the kind of smaller sites that Sherwood has, which is 9 acre sites, generally speaking. And so for the kind of industry that we're trying to attract, we need larger, flatter sites in order to be in the market.
Yep, and we're gonna get to that. We're gonna get into that information here in a second. So our
Yep, and we're gonna get to that.
in our last.
So our employment forecast.
In our last 1.8 annual growth rate, so we have actually increased it quite dramatically here at 3.2.
Here in just a second.
Doesn't seem
So-
Dramatic.
I-
Well, we will stump it, but if we're
Well,
talking about this other number that was a
talking about this
deficit
other
of
number
3,000
that
out of
was a
5,000.
deficit of 3,000 out of 5,000, or 6,000 people.
6,500 and there's a deficit of
There.
3,000.
Household,
You need to grow by
6,500,
50% to take
3,000.
care of a
Need to grow by
deficit that we're
50% to
gonna grow
take
by
care of a
4%.
deficit that
So I
we're
think-
gonna grow by 4%. So I think,
It doubles. It
Yeah,
doubles.
our 1.8 says, yeah. Yeah.
it's the math.
I get it. No,
I know.
totally get it. It's,
No.
I get it. No, I
it's a
totally,
self-
it's a self
prophecy of
prophecy.
Yes.
So, looking at our land demand here, we use scenario 3.
So,
And,
looking and, we allocated
the employment by sector.
the employment
and then we
by-
looked at different building typologies for that employment.
and we converted that employment into space.
Using estimates of the typical
Using
square
estimates of the
footage
typical
per
square footage per
each type
employee
of,
for each type
building
of.
typology.
And
And then
we considered the characteristics of that building type and the amount of land that they required. And we used the common metric of
floor
floor area ratio for that demand.
And
And then that demand for space is converted into the floor area ratio. This is all discussed in your report. But if we take a look at the 3 steps here, so we allocated the growth, which was, the 8,280 jobs for the 20-year forecast. We segmented them into like office, institutional, flex, business park, general industrial warehouse, and retail categories. And then we looked at how much those categories would grow over that 20-year period. So we can see here that, the top 3, employment, growth opportunities in Sherwood is office, followed by general industrial, and then followed by flex and business park. And then we looked at the net change in employment allocated by building type. So this is going to show us, how many employees are in each sector here for those building types. And then at the second step, I know this is pretty technical, like I said, the black box of modeling here. We looked at the employment growth, and then we estimated by the building types, and that was converted into physical space. The demand for that space is converted into the how many my goodness, sorry, I can't see my notes here. So that physical space is then we look. Let me start all over. So our employment growth is estimated by building types, then it's converted to demand for physical space, and then the demand for space is then converted into the associated demand for the acreage using the floor area ratio standard. Yeah. The combined space and the floor area ratio assumptions provide the estimate of job densities. So that's how many jobs per, net acre we will see. And so Sherwood would need, over the 20-year planning period, we see that we'll need 485 acres of employment land.
That's net. So like with a factor of 0.7 or something after we get, or did you set that aside?
No, go ahead.
So that's net buildable, because when we look at Sherwood West, there's net 1,900 acres. 1,291 acres.
1,291, yes.
I keep getting that.
I
keep getting 1,291 acres. So if we don't say 1,200, that's gross acres,
Gross.
and that's a net number. So to get gross acres, we need to add back in to compare apples to apples. If we need divide by 0.8 to come up with the gross acres, because you reduce by 20% for not just for infrastructure, not including wetlands.
Twenty is the factor for those.
For infrastructure usually, isn't it? About
30%.
30%. So. I'm just putting it out there to say, that means 692 of the 1,291 acres would need to be industrial land or jobs land to accommodate the growth.
You're saying on a gross basis.
On a gross basis, because when we as non-planners look at 1,291 acres, we think gross acres. And gross acres for employment land is closer to 700 acres, not 485, because if you were to take that number to the Sherwood West Citizen Advisory Committee, they're thinking, 485 acres, and try and figure out how that's gonna build out Sherwood West at 1291, but that's, we're talking more than 50% of the land in Sherwood West needs to be jobs based.
Except
yeah, we're gonna-
build lots.
Yeah.
We have Tom in there.
But
Yes.
still, that's an interesting comment about gross versus net.
I think we need to be apples to apples.
What's in the 0.3? Just curious.
Infrastructure, roads,
Mhm.
setbacks, right of ways,
Mhm.
and that doesn't, I don't know if it's considered wetlands, not generally, does it?
Not generally. no.
So we're just talking roads.
Mainly roads and utilities. Yeah.
Overhead.
Mhm.
Is this only specific to Sherwood West? No.
No.
This is the current urban, this is.
This does not include Sherwood West.
This is the need, this is the need that exists.
Over
And
20
then we're gonna
years.
get to, let me see what I'm saying, which is the need that exists as defined, the 485 acres. But you're gonna have to subtract from that what already exists that's buildable, and we're gonna get to that in a minute. That gets you the number that is needed beyond the current urban growth boundary.
Not,
Yep.
It's complicated.
but that's, not, it's not complicated, it's just, there's a lot of moving pieces because Sherwood West is a factor. But not the only factor, but when those houses come in, what does it do to the needs analysis of these jobs?
So maybe.
Proportion.
Graphic.
Yeah.
Like pieces of the puzzle, make a whole.
Alright,
Nope.
but gross versus net is.
All right, and then the third step here that we're required to do according to the state is we have to look at our short-term supply, and the state state defines that short-term supply as over the next 5 years. So how much land will be needed for employment in the next 5 years, and it comes out to about 143 acres. In Sherwood, and that includes our Tonkin employment area, and that also includes the Brookman area as well.
That's required in 5 years of the.
Well, needed, yeah.
Needed.
I shouldn't say
So,
required.
of the 485, 143.
43 will be, is estimated to be needed. Mhm.
And again, including the UGB,
Yes, so that's the Tonkin employment area and Brookman,
but not Sherwood West.
but not Sherwood West.
Correct.
All right,
So getting to our buildable lands inventory, this is our supply side of things. How much land do we actually have in Sherwood for these employment opportunities? So we took a look at our buildable lands inventory and we went back and did some refinement. And so, like I said, we put all of our parcels into different buckets. We, put our parcels, we look at how many parcels are already developed that can't be developed anymore. We look at parcels that are partially developed and have some redevelopable opportunity and what that redevelopable opportunity is in size. And then we look at, constraints, and we take out all the constraints for, wetlands, floodplains, steep slopes, etc.
Was this a GIS?
This was the GIS-based model. We went into our GIS system, did some refinements, and so we took out from our last EOA to this EOA, we took out an additional 41 acres of land.
And this is where I thought, this is one of my good sides. I thought this was a very good discussion. That particular model or whatever it was that identified me as had some flaws. I think even one, I remember there one parcel was way off. I don't remember that one, you guys.
It's like 19 acres.
Oh, God.
One of them was, one of them was Allied Systems, the defense contractor. And it showed the original, the 2021 version basically had a fair amount of redevelopable land. It's not.
Yeah. We're just looking at aerial pictures.
You know, that was Eric's
So the
analysis.
data was wrong.
Yeah, it sounds like this is another model, comes, I think, from Metro or somebody owns this thing.
Yes,
They-
so the-
Another black box.
So the original model for our buildable lands inventory came from Metro. So Metro has modeled our land use inventory for us, and then, you know, we went back and we have done the best as we can to, you know, figure out what missteps they might have had. And so we really just refined it,
Yes.
knowing the parcels here in Sherwood, knowing that our technical advisory committee, their boots on the ground, like they know what parcels out there are developed or can be.
Yeah, this was a good
redeveloped.
case if we don't just believe the model, we're gonna truly effective challenge, what we call it, effective challenge this thing. And can't change the model because it's not owned by us in the black box, but we can apply some overlays based on what we know. And there was a good group of people in there that I think knew these properties very well and tried to help address this. So this is a big positive in my view.
So have we built our own model to verify that model?
I want to say that we have refined the buildable lands inventory. We've taken our model and have done heavy refinement to it, making sure that it matches what we know what's on the ground here in Sherwood.
Yeah, I'd say we did ground truthing is what I call it. So their model looks at parcels at a very high level. They're looking at like aerial maps and saying, here's how much building coverage is on this lot, here's how much vacant portion, and then they look at property values as well and say, is this going to reasonably redevelop in the next 20 years or not? But there's all sorts of flaws where if there's open space, for example, on the lot itself, it doesn't, weird things happen. And so that's where we do the ground truth. We went parcel by parcel and said, look, this thing was built in 2016 and you guys think it's going to redevelop in the next 20 years. It's a 50-year building. There's no way. And so we flipped that. We just said, look, we're ground truthing, we're flipping that one. And brokers were able to confirm that.
And it really was parcel by parcel. Just about every, the ones of any significance.
And that's the best
Yeah.
we have as small cities, we can do that, you know, city of Portland, you know, they're using the same model. It's difficult to do that, but that's what we have the leisure of being able to do that.
But one of our, getting back to our comp plan, our goals and policies and our actions, staff, you know, in the comp plan, it definitely says go back to our BLI, you know, every 2 years and take a look in it and to refine it.
So
So-
we have an up and running model that we can.
So this table here, table 5.2 in the report, this is the employment acres by classification and plan designation. So you can see here that we show all of our plan designations. We show how many tax lots are in each, the total acres in each of those plan designations, how many constrained acres, and then how many unconstrained buildable acres we have. And so this is telling us that we have 208 unconstrained buildable acres total for employment here in Sherwood. I'm not going to get into all the specifics of this table, but I think this is a very interesting table, and this gets back to what Bruce was saying about employer needs and site-specific needs that they need. So this table here, if you look down at the tax lots, I think this is really interesting. So let's go to our light industrial plan designation here. So we have 5 tax lots that are, you know, under an acre. And then we have, you know, 5 tax lots that range between, you know, 2 and 5 acres. And then what's really interesting, when we have 0 tax lots that range between 5 and 10 acres, and we have 0 tax lots that range between 10 to 50 acres. So we are really kind of lacking those larger sites that larger targeted industries, may need.
So at the same point where we have a graphic that illustrates our target industries and the lack of sites.
Graphic for that. We don't have a graphic for that.
Some type of pie chart.
I mean, the reality is the way it works is the brokers and the city knows what we need. Because we get the inquiries maybe every 2 weeks from the state economic development agency called Business Alert. And they send us RFIs, request for information. We have a manufacturer, advanced manufacturer from, making this up, not really, it's some kind of aerospace component. And they need 50 acres. Well, we don't have 50 acres, so I immediately say, we're out. I think it's all the time. We don't have the land base here to attract the quality, high-tech, advanced manufacturing companies generally have. When you get a developer that comes in on a 40-acre site, I think it's a 47-acre site, which is where part of where Lamb went to in Sherwood, that's the corner of 124 and 12 Sherwood Road, that's south side. That was, I think, about a 47-acre site there. The developer came in and built an industrial park, which Phil, where buildings were done at least, with one exception, that's going to be at least pretty soon. And they were able to create sites for advanced manufacturing companies. But we don't, that's the 47-acre site, that's gone. We have a 60-acre site, which is the only remaining site that we've got, and that's being developed by Schnitzer Properties now. So everything else is tiny sites. So when a company that's already in the community asks for a site to buy, we have to tell them, we do this a fair amount. Sorry, it doesn't exist. You have to go to Tualatin, and you have to go someplace else. And so when we have a lot of 5 to 9 acre sites, particularly in the immediate interior area of the Pumpkin Play area, and I don't advise anyone to go in there, that's rainy. Donkey Road, no. Everybody's a friend, we don't send them on that road. There's about 4 or 5 to 9 acre sites in there. When developers try to figure out how to build 180,000 square feet of new space in there, they couldn't make a pencil, because with a 9 acre site, you can't pay for all the infrastructure that you need. You can't make it, so they went away. And so we see that a fair amount here. These 9 acre sites are not terribly usable.
And it could be a challenge for brokers and developers to consolidate sites and the site acreage that they need, and have all the property owners, play nice together.
How does this information factor into Metro's process when we, request a UGB expansion, or like our places? I imagine that municipalities are able to try to bring in large areas of land for that type of development. Is that could Shore potentially do that, or is the land just not?
Mm-hmm. So just like our H&A, if our H&A is telling us, yes, our housing needs analysis, sorry. If that's telling us that we have, a certain deficit of land for a certain type of, housing type, we can ask, Metro, when we do a UGB expansion, like why we need that land to be brought in for a specific housing type. So we can use this inventory here for our urban growth boundary request. That kind of helps, back up kind of, our concept planning process and the need for employment land.
someplace, maybe it's another slide, maybe we've gone through it, it shows the need for about 275 acres.
We're gonna get there, Bruce. You're like 2 steps
Okay,
ahead of me.
So that is used when we go to Metro in 2024, or I think it's 2024, to make a request for an expansion so that more jobs land can be created. So this becomes a factor. When it said in 2021 that we needed 8 acres of industrial over the next 20 years, what's the justification for growing? And yet we know the demand is extraordinary here. This happens to be a very good location, sure, when for this to happen. If we were in Burris, it might not be the same.
And, well, when they did it in 2020, they were also doing vacant Conklin, the Conklin employment area was 100% vacant, so. I don't want to disparage whatever work was done previously, is that Conklin employment area was 100% vacant. And it has now developed, and so it is no longer buildable acres.
Hence the purpose of this is to recognize that there's been
Significant reduction in buildable lands
Yep.
because of the Conklin
Sorry.
flood.
No, this is great. I love that you guys are leading my slideshow.
For the record, I asked you for permission before I.
No, it's great. So again, state law requires us to look at the short-term land supply. And over the next 5 years, our buildable acres for employment comes to about 94 acres. Now, I'm just gonna go really quickly here because I want to get to what Bruce just talked about.
Why can't we combine them then?
Because they're all privately owned and we don't have the authority to use eminent domain, or I think the council would want to use eminent domain to assemble properties as was common in California redevelopment. In Oregon, we don't have the authority to bring together parcels. The only way they can come together, Dalkey Lane, I don't know if you had the pleasure. But driving Dalkey Lane, you see a lot of 9-acre parcels and in the interior of the Tonkin employment area, and they're different owners. And the different owners have different intents in mind. Some want to sell, one wants to sell a 9-acre parcel. That was the one where a large Los Angeles developer wanted to put 180,000 square feet of building. They couldn't make it work. And so without assembly, without privately being able to buy adjacent parcels, without being able to get 2 different owners together to privately assemble. In other words, it's not changing ownership. You know, you have one parcel under A, one parcel under B, but they have some kind of an agreement they're going to develop together and share profits or whatever they're going to do. You can't really assemble property, and that's been a really significant problem. The growth of semiconductors, the semiconductor task force made that really clear that this region and really Washington County is the only place that's going to grow. Washington County and this region and the state don't have the land base to attract another in town or something of that sort, because you can't assemble land. It's not ready. It doesn't have the infrastructure. The state, unlike Ohio or some other states, hasn't traditionally provided money to cities to build the infrastructure. And so there's so many constraints that have to be overcome. It just sits and it doesn't help grow a middle class, a big middle class.
So why did this side suggest that there's likely some ability to assemble larger sites?
Because there's some possibility that Dalkey area where this is working is grant now. So look at that and to try to plan that area ahead of development. So that we can kind of have a say in how that area develops as a city. And so we're trying to see if there's a way to privately assemble. That's, I think, what that's referring to.
You know, it is, and and we've done like mailers to property owners and to see what their needs are, what they want to do with their land, and and talking about future annexations of that area. And so we help the city, we do help kind of facilitate those conversations, but it's really going to be up to the property owners whether or not they want to consolidate with their neighbors to sell to a larger
You would think that
employment.
that's significant incentive for them to do that, like when they're looking at something and saying like, my property is not large enough on its own in order for me to realize, full or best or most financially advantageous development potential, you think that they would try to work together to.
Say, as a city, we're taking a very
Proactive.
approach to encourage this to happen. You're
Yeah.
dealing with
Mhm.
brokers that list these properties. We're now doing a plan. It's not a plan for the planning commission, you know, it's not a detailed land use application, but we're doing a plan to show how the parcels could be assembled, but even then, you're only gonna get with 35 acres. Right, 30, something like that, 35
Yeah,
acres
35.
in there, which is really a minimal amount of land for the kinds of industry that we're trying to attract here. But it's, everything counts, right? So, I mean, the city is not just sitting back and hoping it's gonna happen, we're nicely asking the brokers to work and try to get that to happen. And they are working in that regard and with us.
Yeah, in this area, there's 4 different properties in question that are all in different uses, different owners, different intents, and it takes a lot. It takes everyone to be on the same page either by coincidence or the city or a very large developer to come in and purchase, have to just buy everybody out.
Yeah.
And that takes a lot, of capital. Or it takes really, Bruce being really good at his job with brokers and just over time making it happen.
Which he is really great at.
A good example of how this happened is Schnitzer Properties. Very massive developer, they do very little work in Portland, they're based here. They do most of their work in Tucson, Phoenix, the LA Port area, they're an industrial park developer. So they started with a 30-acre parcel, something like 30-acre parcel. And I remember we got a call from the owner of the property and said, would you have any objection if we tried to assemble, I don't know, 8 small parcels, 2-acre, 3-acre parcels to the south? The owner of 30-acre did that. He has then he's coming in with over 900,000 square feet of industrial park development, which will get built.
That's your Sherwood Commerce.
Commerce, that's phase 2, right? You could approve the first phase, but that includes the second phase. So that one owner saw the reason to negotiate with 8 other property owners to make it happen. We couldn't have made that happen, other than encouraging him to do it, and that's what we did.
And you tried sending out $5 Starbucks gift cards?
Well, they wanted 6.
Oh.
And I put in the budget, it wasn't there.
All right.
Talk to city council.
Sorry.
So the very last step here is, reconciling our employment forecast with our land supply. And so our 20-year forecast of employment, land demand and capacity, as you can see here in this figure. Over the 20-year planning forecast, there is an estimated deficit of 36 acres for commercial, retail, and office. And there is a deficit of 238 acres for industrial and office types of uses. So the total, we have a deficit of 277.
I'm not sure.
So is there a reason why it's that buildable? Is that the state requirement? Because again, if we're gonna be doing requests and asks and conversations, it would be nice to have it in same.
I will look into that. I know that the OA, the Oregon Administrative Rules, says something, but Gene, that's a great question.
This is a very regulated document.
I understand, but or even just a bullet point that says, this represents.
Sure.
485 represents 692 gross. When you factor in public
Code
improvement.
improvements and right away. Yeah,
So Eric, is this deficit essentially planned or supposed to be made up through Sherwood West?
Yes.
Okay.
Because this is beyond the current urban growth boundary, and the only area that's effectively within reasonable timeframe that's beyond the urban growth boundary that is adjacent to the city, potentially viable land is the Sherwood West Technology Innovation Park site, which is the northern part of Sherwood West, intended as a place for technology.
So as a member of the Citizen Advisory Committee, I would venture a guess that some of the citizen advisory committee would be shocked that it's already been named something when we haven't even had a
It's just a
final
word.
meeting.
Doesn't have any.
But it was kind of like.
I was gonna say that hasn't been approved yet, the whole.
No, it's not an approved thing, but it's still a
The
marketing name.
Sherwood West Citizen Advisory Committee hasn't come through,
Yeah.
that's the final plan that hasn't come.
That hasn't been the public hearing with us.
No.
But that's the concept that's being looked at in that area rather than a distribution part, which is really too far from freeway anyway.
Right.
And then looking at our short-term land supply, so over the next five years for our land demand and capacity, we're looking at a total deficit of about 24 acres. So the conclusions here on the slide, over the next 20 years, like I said, there's a deficit of about 277 acres for employment land. And in the short term, there's a deficit of nearly 24 acres. We need to keep monitoring our sites over time. There's not a lot of sufficient opportunities or, sites out there for small to mid-sized businesses who need, parcels that are 5 acres or more. And then this also gets back to one of the main points that Bruce made at the very beginning of this presentation, and that this forecast, we didn't include, Oregon Semiconductor's task force that's being done. And their recommendation is that there's a current need for 2 sites of 500 plus acres, and there's 4 sites of 50 to 100 acres and 8 sites of 15 to 35 acres that are needed. And if the city is interested in pursuing this opportunity, the city will need to add, the appropriate numbers of sites with the appropriate number of acreage.
But you can't project that out because the economist says
It's
it's
outside the scope. Yeah.
So this would be additive amount for Sherwood to be competitive in that regard.
And then in the very back, which I did not make a slide for, we have all of our recommended actions for economic development relating to our goals and policies in the comprehensive plan.
So question, are these are already our existing goals and policies?
Correct.
But these are the actions.
But those are the actions, and those actions are not in the comp plan because they will actually fall into our community action plan to implement the comp plan eventually.
So say that again.
We started an action plan to implement the comprehensive plan. So these are the action strategies that would be in that action plan, but we're going to adopt them too as part of this EOA update.
So this gets more specific in terms of actions than what the comp plan has, but it's based on the policies in the comp plan.
Exactly.
This is how you're gonna implement.
This is
How we implement.
That's the comp plan. It gets a little more level of detail.
I understand what you're saying, it's just so
It's
let's
really-
make another
It's
list.
very, it's very interesting.
I do have a question on one of these. Related to action
Yes.
5.
Action.
When we say we will do updated periodically, I generally like to see a range, so it has something that has increased,
Mhm.
every 3 to 5 years or something like that. So
Yeah.
generally, that's something like on action number 7. So we talk about once the Sherwood West concept plan is adopted, the city will need to prepare the Sherwood West infrastructure implementation plan, submit an application to Metro, and then there's a period of time in 2024. Is that realistic? Is that really something that we can hit 2024? Okay.
We have to. Otherwise we wait 6 years.
Yeah, so let's not do that.
Unless you're the 75% of the city of Sherwood that doesn't want a metro expansion.
Yeah.
So, what? A generalization, yes. There's a random number of people that do not want it. Yes.
Number 18, provide business assistance services under the action itself.
18.
Yes.
18.
Provide business assistance services, technical support, existing and new businesses. I know Sherwood has outreach on Facebook and others to, they're actually implementing this, but who is going to be providing the business?
I'm the connector, if you would.
Okay,
And so when we get a business that's looking for systems, I'll tell you an example, we have a company that's in Tualatin that's looking, it can't grow in Tualatin, that wants to buy existing business to grow here. So they have a complicated deal. They want to buy an existing business. They want to grow their own business in Sherwood, and they're buying land to expand. So what I did is I arranged a meeting with State Economic Development Agency for them, it's called Business Org. We sat down with the financial advisor on this, we talked for about an hour about it, realizing how complicated it was, it required a lot of different skills. So then I next set up a meeting with Oregon Manufacturing Technology Consulting, which is every state has a technology extension. And the one in Oregon is the one I just mentioned. So we set up a meeting with them, try to help this company to understand what they need to do as a manufacturing company to grow their manufacturing business. We then connected them with PCC's capital advisory, capital access team. So that's what we were doing as staff to try to help this company, so they wouldn't go down a path and fail. We don't ever want that to happen if we can help it. We do this day in and day out, this kind of thing. We connect a company. We don't want to just have a company call us and tell what to do. We want to connect them to experts, and there's experts in the bioscience field to connect them to, there's experts in other fields, and that's the real critical component of what economic development is and should be doing.
perfect. I have more if there's.
Yeah,
No, this is
perfect.
great.
So on 23, in the bullet points. What, and maybe this is in the comprehensive plan that I haven't digested yet, but is it? If we reach out to industrial brokers in the Bay Area and specifically in San Francisco. Why are those two areas identified as?
Yeah, there's some target regions that, there's a regional marketing organization called Greater Portland Inc. It's a public-private organization that we're very active in. They have the money to go down and do trade shows. So they go to Japan, they go different places to bring companies, technology, and advanced manufacturing in Portland. They know who we're competing with. We're competing not well with Austin, Texas, a similar sized metro, and we're not Texas. All right, so we have that. But we're about 2.5 million in both metros, Portland and Austin. So I don't think of Texas that way, but we are losing out to cities like Columbus, Ohio, Charlotte, North Carolina, similar sized metros. So we know what we're losing out to as we try to grow the region's economy, because I'm sure we'll only grow if the region grows in terms of jobs. Also know where the target markets are. The target markets are generally going to be the Silicon Valley, the San Francisco Bay Area, still includes the Silicon Valley. The costs of doing business are too high. Those companies are escaping and going to Arizona, going to Texas, going to Atlanta. They're just escaping the Bay Area if they can. But so that's a strong target market. And I just say the Bay Area because I'm a whole person. Just to do the Bay Area brokers is like overwhelming. A person is one person.
Yeah.
But I need to focus on that. Vancouver, BC is a logical market for us as a region. We have lower costs in some ways than Vancouver, BC. Another logical location is the Los Angeles basin, Metro Los Angeles, San Diego, which is of course a hub of life science companies. That's the target markets for us. In this particular case, I picked one area.
So can we, just to jump in, can we just say, reach out to industrial brokers in target areas?
Yes.
There we go. X, Y, and Z, so that.
Yeah. Good point.
I'm gonna ask a side kind of question to this. Why the focus emphasis on technology? And the reason I'm asking that is mainly in light of economic changes. The overall economy is not in recession right now,
Right.
but there are segments of the economy that are housing,
Right.
tech, definitely.
Yeah.
And so I'm just curious why the focus on those.
When I say tech, I'm really dealing a lot with advanced manufacturing and processes that are used in advanced manufacturing, which are often tech. Like DW Fritz, when they expanded from Wilsonville to here, got bought out by a Swedish company, and they come to Sherwood. What they do is they're not really a tech company. They're a supplier to Fortune top 10. They never like to say who they supply to, Fortune 5 and top 10. And so what they're doing in Sherwood, what they've done in Wilsonville, now the manufacturing in Sherwood, is they make products for the clean tech industry, they make products for the semiconductor industry, they make products, there's various industry categories. So tech is just a generic word I'm using because but it's really advanced manufacturing that we're particularly focused on, and that's really what we're seeing grow. People said everything was going to become distribution insurance, and didn't, because there's manufacturers, there's so many manufacturing companies, advanced manufacturing, Greater Portland, that are looking to leave the city of Portland. And they can't find space, or for whatever reason, they don't want to be in Portland. It's not for me to say. So they look here, they ask us whether we get space, and these are really high quality companies that are looking here. But we don't have space in most cases in Portland, and so you don't know where they go because nobody does studies on it. But they most likely leave the state. There's a lot of companies leaving the state.
I think for presentation, the phrase advanced manufacturing, clean tech. If we just use the phraseology a little bit different for the audience, it will be a better outreach instead of people thinking, because when you think tech, you think Intel, and then you get pigeonholed in something. Or Silicon Valley, yeah, you get pigeonholed in something when we use the broader advanced manufacturing, that phrase I really appreciate, because it has a broader meaning and can.
And there's certainly underpinning of government support, then CHIPS Act, deal.
Yeah.
That space.
Yeah, and the reason we often say semiconductors is because so many of the grants that we look at, we say they're only focused on semiconductor or advanced manufacturing. We power that.
Yeah, so we use advanced manufacturing, yeah.
Anything in action 9.
Mhm.
Either do it with the first bullet point where it says work with the property owners too, or indent the following two.
You want to say 9, that?
Yeah, action 9.
It's not a bullet point on the first one.
Oh.
Or insert.
Yeah, that's my typing. You're right.
I mean, it makes sense with number 10 below, but I
Yeah,
think we're gonna have either insert the following two or do it with the first one.
Mhm.
yeah, good one. Good bullet point. Sorry.
Under action item 1, we don't, so I'd like to see the implementation discuss, like, identify all existing potential new industrial or commercial sites. The how is identified in the notes. I also want to see like the use of innovative technology, or we should discuss the technology that's being used. And I know we have the models and everything else that we are refining, but possibly including after landowners adding or additional methodologies or something to that effect.
Sure.
Technology is gonna be GIS.
Yeah.
I'll say that.
Yep.
Yeah.
So say that again.
Basically indicating on the notes section under action 1 that for an action, this would include sites in the city, UGB and the adjacent urban reserve suitable for current future employment, including site acreage, broker, contact landowners, and the use of the city's GIS or something to that effect, where we identify and we maintain. So the only way to implement this action is to have like a robust data set with metadata that's accurate.
Yes, thank you.
So, and that should also include, parsing through the metadata to make sure that it's accurate,
Mhm.
recurring basis.
By the way, I do appreciate the support of documentation in Appendix A and Bill and it all. That's good. Yes. That kind of
That's an error.
Good. It's fair. Hope we have more of that on the demand forecasting side. But-
We can probably share that with you. Metro has it, we can share it with you.
Okay,
Is,
but actually, let me ask about I think we use scenario 3 out of this thing, so maybe this is a first question.
Yes, we did.
Okay, so because we deviated from scenario 1, are we still covered under safe harbor? Or do we lose that because we?
So we kind of, we lose that safe harbor. But we had so many people, great people on our TAC committee, including the state of Oregon, that we have the buy-in.
Yeah, I mean, we have frankly the leading industrial broker in South Metro. Much of the greater metro area. And these are the folks who frankly know, Margaret, these are the folks, we can't go to companies in other cities, we can't go where NSI was.
Yeah.
And say, I'm sure that we don't do that. The city government, but they can do it. And they know all the companies, because that's what they do for a living. And so we do look heavily on what the industrial brokers know. We look heavily on what Greater Portland is, the regional marketing entity, what they know, they run this, they run the TAC. We look at Washington County Economic Development is on the TAC. And who am I missing? NAOP, which is McKinsey, was appointed. McKinsey Engineering does all the site, almost all the, so much of the site planning work in Greater Portland for industrial manufacturing projects. So NAOP, which is a trade association of the industrial developers, they brought NAOP, and they brought McKinsey to the table. They know, they really do know what demand is. I'm not sure how you quantify that. Actually, it's a lot of it is they do it in their living.
Yeah, and it's common to, I mean, because every model has limitations, it's common to overlay with expert judgment and review and all that. It's just a starting point. It wasn't clear to me how this is determined and
We'll
that.
talk to Jerry Johnson and see if we can get some clarification there. And then I think I do just want to prepare you that potentially we'll get comments on this. I think, we've done, Eric did a great job in the city, Avalar did a great job with the TAC and preparing this document. But there are organizations and maybe residents, others out there who might not agree. And so we might.
With what, the conclusion? With-
on the conclusion of the EOA, there are other organizations that might look at this and comment on it prior to your public hearing even in 2 weeks. So I don't want to say, oh, everything's fine. We've made I think just a really good faith effort to get all of this right, to get it right based on our council goals and our community needs. But at the same time, it's a public process and a public document. And there have been instances, normally when we get comments, they come in at the last moment. So, I mean, they could even, oftentimes they come in the day of the public hearing. And so you might get that. And so just want to prepare you guys that, hey, we might get public testimony on this the day of the hearing in 2 weeks. And so, that's why staff will be there. We can cut through it. And we welcome public testimony as well. But there might even be some more technical, testimony on assumptions. So we might get that as well.
so to that end, since usually we're an advisory to the city council, what's the time frame for accepting public testimony? If we bring in, first off, they have 4 minutes. So if they're bringing in technical information and they hand a packet to us, I don't wanna vote on something that we haven't had a chance to read.
Yeah.
So are we going to have the window time to have a continuance, so anybody that we can open it, accept public testimony, accept any written documentation, and then before deliberation, continue the hearing if necessary?
For sure. So this is the legislative
I just want to know
hearings.
notice for council.
Yep,
Okay.
yeah.
Yeah, if you guys are not comfortable making a decision for any reason, and especially if testimony comes in that you guys want to take a look at, let us know.
Mhm.
We can continue to research how.
Right, I'm just saying, if someone brings in a document that is warranted to read it.
Totally, yeah, I mean, we want to look, I mean, it could be very smart for us to look at that and, respond to it, or, as soon as possible, get it in Jerry's hands and.
Yeah.
that type of thing.
Yeah, so, and then I would just say, it's a formatting thing more than anything, so the introduction is labeled I, then I, and so. But then you say the report is generated in 6 primary sections, so you first go. The introduction should be different numbering, and then if we could make economic trend be section 1 and label the section 1 and have the section titles match the titles that are in the introduction, because the next section is it's just or it's then all your numbering's off. So number 3, target industry analysis matches, but when we get further on, the titles on title 7, which is actually 6, says economic development strategies, but we say that 6 is economic development potential and conclusions, and so we don't have. And the capacity is labeled in the introduction, but I think it's called
Okay.
reconciliation, no, it's not, oh, that is called buildable lands. Yeah, so the names that are on the titles don't match the introduction.
Right, fixed titles with introductions.
I'm talking this right here in the
Yep.
introduction, yeah.
Mhm.
And even because I see that you have everything, all the figures and everything are based on the chapter, figure 1, figure 8, maybe if we just say to this end, the report is follows in 6 primary sections, and then chapter 2, chapter 3, chapter 4, so you don't have to renumber all of your. Because if you change that economic trends to be number 1,
Yeah, we're gonna have to change all the numbers.
that would be insane.
Yeah.
So.
Yep.
And just put parentheses in chapter 2.
Yeah,
Yeah, or something,
Yeah.
yeah.
so that, yeah, because the numbering
Section 2.
Mhm.
and the titles, I would have assumed that in the development potential and conclusions. That it says development strategy, but the conclusion is not. A clear conclusion. In the last section.
What page, sorry?
Well, that's what I'm saying, is that the last thing is chapter 6/7. Economic development potential and conclusions, and so it says economic development strategy.
Oh, right here, yes.
What is that?
Yeah, right. Right. I think,
So development potential and conclusions is a misnomer,
mhm.
unless there's a chapter that's.
Nope.
missing
There's not, it should be this.
development strategy.
Yep.
So there's no summary conclusion.
Mm-mm.
Yeah, that's usually good to have in the opening. The new thing too, like the executive summary kind of thing.
Yeah, so the introduction
Mhm.
could be the introduction and summary.
Mhm.
Because if it's like a traffic study that's 500 pages long, we read the white page and then look for the details. The
That's
executive
pretty easy.
summary.
I'm not sure how you catch all this. I don't know if I want to know, but thank you for that.
I was just thinking Tyler was up in the
Well, yes,
A.
I got another, I like visuals, that's in my.
I know, that's.
Attention to detail.
You gotta
We got back up, Gene.
be able to talk to your audience.
Yeah.
Tables, some people see tables, some people see graphics, some people see text.
No, I totally agree. We're hiring, by the way, for everyone, we're hiring a new associate planner and he does have visual communication skills, so I'm sure to load those up for you.
As you've already hired,
Mhm.
okay, they did have.
We.
May 1st.
have Made an offer,
I see.
and they should be starting May 1st.
Comes with his own box of crayons.
Or the GIS.
Oh, okay.
Can I just, from a high level, like you mentioned, you might get comments, or like, that's, we welcome comments. The way it's, I mean, I'm just, sometimes people can get maybe perhaps upset at reports like this or whatever, not like them. And I'm just trying to think the reason for that is could be because of the implications of it. I think in the state of Oregon, again, big picture, we have to maintain a 20-year supply, right? Under Oregon law. And that factors in the urban growth boundary. So the implications of this report are that we are undersupplied on industrial land, and therefore we must do something to allow for that. Is that, and that could potentially be what, if somebody's reading this going, I don't like industrial stuff in Sherwood, this would be a bothering report because of that.
Yes, I think that's really good. I think that's absolutely right. If the concern is coming from, Sherwood residents. We could also get testimony from outside parties that are kind of watching the urban growth boundary and watching growth in picture in the region and have their own technical staff as well. That's one of the technical comments we can.
That would be a good slide at the beginning
That's what
that
I think, yeah.
explains the Oregon state law that requires
Land
a.
use laws.
Yes,
Land use laws.
Yeah.
But also an executive summary that explains to
Yes.
somebody who's gonna be reading this document, like, this is why it's not necessary.
You know what, that's really good. So the introduction page, if we have chapter 1D and executive summary, then all your numbering works. You see what I'm saying?
Oh, yes.
That's you guys are in
See,
that.
the introduction is all here.
Slightly.
To this end, the report is structured in 6 primary sections, including an executive summary, and make executive summary chapter 1, then chapter 2, and then all your tables are right. So then your executive summary becomes chapter 1. You see what I'm saying?
yeah, so this becomes a summary up here.
Yeah, so the introduction is just an introduction, and then chapter 1 is the executive summary.
Or you flip it around and say executive summary is not a section and introduction.
Yeah, either way. That way.
This kind of stuff may work a lot.
So,
Could be daily.
could be daily. I'm just saying, we already
We'll
have
work on it.
chapters 2 through 7 are already, unless you want to renumber. Unless you want to renumber all your tables to match 6 chapters.
Well, I really do appreciate the action in getting us involved and obviously the level of work that you put in, so. Thanks for having us on board.
All right, now that's the end of the economic opportunity analysis divided. Before we adjourn, kind of wanted to go through. Couple things I wanted to do is one is just make sure everybody understands next meeting will be in the big room. We'll be on broadcasting just like we are. And it'll be a more formal public hearing process. So what we will do is there is a script that Erica will give to all of us that says that the staff will have so many minutes for presentation, the applicant will have so many minutes for their presentation. Then people in favor of the application will testify, those opposed to the application will be testified. And we as commissioners can ask questions through the process, but we generally try and keep those questions at the break points. So like after staff does the presentation, I'll call for questions of the commissioners. And then if there's any questions from the audience, generally speaking, we don't answer them from the dais ad hoc. We allow for a break, allow the applicant, if it's one of these is going to be this for hearings. The applicant is the city, and then the other one I think is just a regular land use application. Is it?
Correct. So we will have an applicant.
So we'll have an applicant and allow them to answer 4 questions that are asked by the community. And then there's 2, so there'd be 2 different types of hearings on that night. The hearing that we're having on this economics opportunity is a legislative one, which means that we are making a recommendation to the city council as a type 5 application, and so the city council makes the final decision, and it's appealed to the land use board of appeals at the state level if the decision is appealed by someone. And as a legislative matter, we don't, you've discussed ex parte contact, bias, conflict of interest, so we're familiar with that. And so the legislative one, we are representing the community, and we want to be out there talking with people so that they know that this is what's happening, get feels, because it is affecting everybody in the community at the same level. The other hearing that we're having, I don't know, I haven't seen it, I don't want to know about it, I just want to know that it's a site plan.
It's not a site plan.
What is it?
It's a zone change.
It's a zone change, so that's a legislative matter also, but it is site specific. And so because it is site specific, it has ex parte content. So if you know the person that owns the property or will be impacted by it, or do either recusal, or if you have a conversation with someone, I personally take a notepad. If someone starts talking to me, I say, well, you know, it's gonna be in front of us. Can I just jot down a couple of notes? First, I say, can you ask staff, please, because they know all the stuff.
Or come to the public hearing.
Or come to the public, but if they have questions, sometimes it's nice to ask staff ahead of time, so. And then, the other thing I do, because I don't know how big the packets are gonna be. There's some, you know, like the first time you go to a planning commission hearing, sometimes the packets are pretty thick, and so I try and orient myself to what is, it sounds crazy, but when it's site specific, I try to go to the neighborhood meeting minutes first. And the applicant's white page executive summary, so I know where it is, what they're talking about, what they want to do, and if I go to the neighborhood meeting, I can see what the people that were at the meeting were talking about. This helps me get oriented. And then I also go to the exhibits first, before I start reading all the staff report, because then I kind of remember, oh, the TVFNR said this, Pride said this, and we had 6 citizens send in letters. And so when I've read all that, and then I go look at the staff report, then I'm looking at, did the staff address that citizen's comment someplace in there? And then if I don't see it, then I remember, because then I go back and just reference my notes, to make sure that those questions were answered. So, and if there's a transportation study that's 500 pages, I read the executive summary. And if 500 pages get glanced at, if I have a concern about a particular intersection, I want to look at it. And usually, you know, I'm trying to just form really intelligent questions for the traffic engineer that's coming. And the last thing I do is I call the staff. Whenever I have a question, Erica, Joy are just super fabulous. They are absolutely incredible when it comes to knowing what's going on with the application. And if I can, you know, we get the packets on Tuesday, Wednesday, so usually I'm reading them Friday, Saturday, Sunday, and I try and call them Monday, and if I'm reading it Tuesday on my lunch break, I will call them by the end of the lunch break if I can. Just because I don't want to show up at 6:45 and say, oh, by the way, I disagree with 3 of your findings, and we're gonna have to change them on the fly, because that is.
So you're available 24/7, right?
Oh,
Yeah.
Before we close, when you opened the meeting, I believe you read March 28th. Today is the 11th.
Oh, this is,
From.
oh, it is. Look at that, April, what is today? April
Today's the
11th.
Good.
Yep,
That's March 28th.
March 28th.
I'm fine with that, I guess.
You know,
Holy moly.
I'm an accountant, so I am in March right now. So I had no qualms about it being March. So, we're all volunteers. We all make mistakes. Oh, well, all of us in the middle here.
You guys, but they should not make mistakes ever.
We make mistakes all the time.
And they,
That's how you
I
learn.
work as good as the staff makes me look good, and the rest of my commissioners helping me out, so, I don't. I mean, this to me, I do it because I care about the community, I care about making sure that citizens who are scared of testifying have a voice and don't feel intimidated. I mean, it is scary. I go to city council meetings to testify, I'm on the other side of the table, and it's, man, that other side of the table is not, it's not as easy. I can talk to 125 people. I do not have an issue with public speaking. But when you're testifying to 7 people that are on the other side, you're
A
like.
little bit higher than you, all in a row looking at it.
Yeah, it's intimidating, and as much as we can be personal to them and give them a voice, that's what I feel like I'm doing. So The only time I ever look at the videos is just try to make sure that I wasn't wearing the same sweater that I was wearing at the last hearing. If we're continuing it for that, and the same 17 people are gonna be in the audience, I'd at least like to. Them to know that I have more than one, Marine sweater.
I definitely watched for that.
I know,
Wearing the same shirt as last time.
yeah, this is brand new, so I knew it
Oh my
was new
gosh.
tonight for, that. Because I can't watch myself and then not feel intimidated, and I don't want to feel intimidated. I can be kind of unfiltered, that I do the best I can, and so. That's all we ask, is do the best we can and ask a lot of questions
It's a
and.
great chair.
Oh,
Great.
Yes.
Like this, where the chair of the planning commission provides, not only in different cities, Texas and California, provides this kind of guidance to the planning commissioners. I think this is very impressive. I'm just saying this.
And also the meeting facilitation,
Mhm.
very strong, which is super important for meetings, so.
yeah, poor Dan, he started 2020, yeah.
Oh, yeah.
2020 when we were COVID, he started
I
COVID.
started online. That,
Yeah.
the challenge with that was there was nobody I could ever lean over and ask questions to really.
Mhm.
There was just nothing outside the always on the program now that recorded broadcasting framework. That was like, I can't ask a dumb question, and then we sign off and nobody else around, until the next recorded public meeting, and so this learning curve was a little harder.
A little harder and not knowing ex parte contact and who can you ask questions of and not wanting to get in trouble. It was, that was a really rough time, because you were right before COVID, weren't you, just a few months?
No.
Were you?
I was.
No.
2017.
2017, okay, so
Yeah.
3 years like that, okay, so. Yeah,
So
so
muddled through.
we muddled through. Poor Commissioner Todd had to take over when I had foot surgery, so that was, and we had some pretty.
Like the worst meeting ever. I don't know how bad I read. So,
Well, no, there was.
No.
foresee why you can never not be chair.
Well, there were 4 hearings, I think, in one night, I mean, it.
We should adjourn. the meeting.
Yeah. Anyway,
Yeah.
do you have any questions before we go? Or I was gonna get my card out and give you my phone number, so in case something comes up. Can't really help ex parte contact, but if questions.
I was gonna send everybody the new roster electronically tomorrow.
Okay, that would work great, so,
Like you said, great.
all right, there's them.
Pretty green right now. so-
Yeah.
Yes.
All right,
I know.
go ahead and adjourn.
Color, not.
All right, so we are adjourned, and then we can even have